met this gentleman yesterday evening. It's the first time we had met, and I have to say that you know, I felt that in one hand I've met a soul brother. I'd certainly met an incredibly intelligent, deep thinker, and in fact it was great to be surrounded by so many good people last night having that conversation. Jamais writes about the intersection of emerging technologies, environmental dilemmas, and cultural transformation. He's specializing in the design and creation of plausible scenarios of the future. His work focuses on the importance of long-term systems thinking, and it's something that is, I think, sadly missing in this world where we judge our world on quarters throughout the year, rather than thinking about what we call the art of the long view. He's interested in emphasizing the power of openness and transparency, something which I think is a very hot topic today, and quite rightly so. And the flexibility is catalyst for building a more resilient society, something that really speaks to my heart. He writes a blog, or is just writing a blog for Fast Company called Open the Future. His book, Hacking the Earth, Understanding the Consequences of Geoengineering, was published this year. And I know some friends of mine in the audience are already reading it. And again, it's a second book on your reading list today. You've got to go down to the bookshop and order Hacking the Earth or buy it. He's been involved with Institute of the Future and Global Business Network. And he is, though, probably most famous for calculating the carbon footprint of cheeseburgers. Now, I'm not sure whether that's the topic of his presentation today.
Not today.
But anyway, Jamais, thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's just hope I live up to that. Good afternoon, people. Thank you very much for coming out. This is going to be a very fun day. I'm going to continue the big picture conversation. Welcome to the world of tomorrow. I'm spending a lot of time today looking at, I'll be spending my time today looking at where all this stuff is going. How can we think about the kinds of drivers, the kinds of emerging technologies, the kinds of issues that are going to be debated today, and as we go forward, thinking not just about mobile technologies, but really the role of technology in our lives, the intersection and coevolution of technology and society. Now, I am a professional futurist. Now, that means that for some unknown reason, people pay me money to talk about this kind of stuff. And I spend my days, spent the last 15 years, thinking about how do these different drivers, how do these different issues intersect in ways that generate novelty, that create new paradigms for how the world works. Now, I talk about being a futurist, and this is probably what comes to mind for a lot of you. I don't have a crystal ball, and more importantly, I don't make predictions. The things I talk about are not, telling you what will happen. We will be flying jetpacks. You will be freezing your head. No. I want to talk more about how do these issues, what are the points of provocation? How do these things intersect in ways that may lead to certain outcomes, may lead to a variety of outcomes? I like to think in terms of scenarios and multiple possible futures, not to tell you what will happen, but to tell you what could happen, such that you can make your own plans, make your own strategies, and build your own ideas to shape that emerging world. Now, there's a newer vision of what a futurist could be. Iron Man is a futurist, apparently. But the more important line here is, he saw what was coming, and he acted. Now, in this case, he's beating up She-Hulk, but don't worry, it's She-Hulk, she can take it. So I'm going to talk tonight, this afternoon, about the augmented future. When I talk about augmentation, and in particular augmentation of cognition, augmentation of our intelligence, this is the kind of thing that comes to mind, plugging stuff into our heads. This is a somewhat more practical version of augmentation. This is actually Provigil, which I am currently hopped up on right now. This is just as an aside on this, it's a drug that was originally developed to fight narcolepsy. But it turns out that it has a much wider audience of people who use it to fight jet lag. And just as a pure happenstance, it turns out that it accelerates cognition. Measurably, repeatedly. There's an MIT study, there was a Cambridge study. It basically, a certain subset of tasks associated with intelligence, particularly around pattern recognition, get accelerated with this drug. And this is also intelligence augmentation. You know, this is a Kindle, but it could be any kind of mobile technology. These are ways that we build, that we've basically constructed an outside of the brain. It's through the internet, through these mobile tools, we have constructed a set of technologies that make us smarter. Don't always make us wiser, but make us smarter. And this is not, this is not new, because this is intelligence augmentation as well, as other people. Now, Alan spoke briefly about the idea of twittering things back and forth. And think about Twitter as an extension of our minds, an extension of our awareness, an extension of our capacity for immediate accumulation and distribution of knowledge. I'm a Twitter user, live in the San Francisco area. I had the remarkable experience of seeing a burst of Twitter messages pop up saying, oh, earthquake, 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 from people I knew in the area, and like a split second later, starting to feel it. The Twitter, because it was like South Bay, so it took some time for the waves to propagate, the Twitter message got to me before the waves of the earthquake. Now, yes, it's really a coincidence, but still, well, isn't that wild? Anyway, so lastly, this is intelligence augmentation. In fact, in many respects, the city was the first model of intelligence augmentation. This new form of social organization that allowed for distribution of labor, allowed for differentiation of social roles. It allowed for the development and innovation around tools and around practices and technologies and changes to our social lives. In many respects, those of you, there may be a lot of you out there who are familiar with the concept of the singularity. I think that urbanization was the first singularity, because the kinds of lives that we lead, that we lead as urban humans, so totally different from the kinds of lives we led as pastoral gatherer hunters. Now, I've sort of wind this all back to mobile technologies. This is some of you may be familiar with this chart. It's from the Metaverse Roadmap report done in 2007. It's basically a look at the future of different kinds of virtual immersive technologies. And we developed this. I was co-author on this report. We developed this graph as a way of really giving you a sense of how to structure the relationship between these technologies. Now, while there are mobile aspects to all of these, different areas, life logging and virtual worlds and the like, we're going to be spending a lot of time today talking about the upper left quadrant there, augmented reality. But the way I'm talking about it is as augmented intelligence. Here's one way things start to get augmented. Mobile technologies give us a way of augmenting our sensory perception, our sensory awareness. It gives us a capacity to see more of the world than we could see before. There's a term out of the world of design, making the invisible visible. And mobile technologies give us one tool, one methodology of making the invisible visible, seeing things that we couldn't see before, and communicating that vision to others. Augmented society. Now, this is a mock-up I did of what a reputation network might look like if you were wearing it on your glasses. And sure, it's just a Photoshop play. But at the same time, it's the kind of thing that as these technologies start to integrate into our lives, as these things move from being just a standalone application to something that you have on your person at all time and integrates with other parts of your technological ecosystem and your social ecosystem, you start to see these kinds of results of potentially unexpected, potentially quite troubling, like I said, coevolution, synthesis of these different drivers. Augmented environments. And here's where the technologies around mobile awareness link up with the technologies of smart cities, smart environments, sensors everywhere. Having something that you carry in your pocket that when you hold it up in front of you, you see an entirely new layer of information about the world. Whether it's when the next bus is hitting, what the temperature or carbon particulate level is, what path you're supposed to take. And it's not something that is intrusive and in front of you at all times, but it's something that is always accessible. Now, this is something that is a little bit more advanced than we could do right now, but it's really not too far off. I just last week downloaded an application for my Google phone called SkyMap, which gives me, you hold it up, and because I have a GPS and a compass, magnetometer built into the phone, it knows exactly where I am and where I'm pointing the phone, and it can show me what I'm looking at in the sky. I want to find Mars, I click search, and it points me to Mars. That's pretty cool, and it's that kind of augmented awareness of the world based on both the built-in sensors in the phone itself and our rapidly expanding knowledge of the universe. And then there's a darker side too, augmented power. This is a real photo from, I think, 2004. It's of a failed roadside bomb in Iraq. It used to be, they don't do this anymore, but initially the insurgents in Iraq and in Afghanistan would use mobile phones as triggering devices for improvised explosive systems. I just love, by the way, the call missed message. And this is, while this is a particularly narrow instantiation of the role and the power of mobile tools, augmentation technologies as dangerous as weapons, it's instructive. Because it's not simply that this is a negative application of the mobile technologies that we all hold dear. It's something that was developed by a group of angry insurgents in the desert. Figure this out, put it together. What's more, started to share that knowledge. One small cluster of people figured it out, and it became an open source insurgency. There's a guy named John Robb, works out of Washington, D.C., talks a lot about global guerrillas and open source warfare. This notion that these kinds of tools of communication, these kinds of tools of transparency and access, especially the mobile tools, give us a new layer not just of empowerment for society, empowerment for our economy, but also empowerment for people who wish to do harm. Whether you have, whatever the political aspects are, this is something that could be used outside of Iraq as well. Just remember, you talk about Twitter, we talk about political empowerment. How many of you know the story of how the massacre, the Rwandan genocide happened? There was basically radio broadcasts telling, encouraging people to go out and slaughter their neighbors. How soon do you think it'll be before we see a genocide perpetuated, provoked over Twitter? Oh yeah, I wish. It's something where you start to see this message. What's the hashtag for something like that? Yeah. So we think, here are all these different kinds of manifestations of what mobile technologies can be, different manifestations of how they empower us and augment us. So let's skip back up into the big picture and think about how, what are the core drivers? What are the big underlying elements that help us describe what kind of future emerges through the intersection of these different tools? So the first core driver is participation. We've talked a lot about that already. We're going to talk a lot about it throughout this day, and I'm sure it's something that you experience, that you deal with a lot of you in your day-to-day lives in terms of how you use your technologies, in terms of how you integrate your own activity with others. It's this sense of empowerment, a sense of agency, a sense of being a participant. You can act and play a role in shaping the future. There's interconnection. And this is related, obviously related to participation, but it's really the focus here is on the bandwidth, the connection between different individuals, between groups, the kinds of technologies and media that enable the connection. It may not be fully two-way. You can have an interconnected environment that is largely driven by essentially broadcast media. And yet, the capacity, the potential for multicast, the potential for peer-to-peer, the potential for truly interactive media is there and shouldn't be ignored, because that has become increasingly a true catalyst, a true transformative catalyst. And the last one is something that leapfrogging. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the term. It actually comes out of a 1973 political science paper by a guy named Alexander Gerschenkron called Economic Backwardness in a Historical Perspective. Really exciting stuff. But basically arguing that if you look over the course of history, societies that, for whatever reasons, end up lagging, end up falling a little bit behind, or a great deal behind other societies, actually have a competitive advantage in that they can leapfrog. They can adopt cutting-edge technologies, cutting-edge tools, cutting-edge behaviors, social systems that their competitors that are ostensibly more advanced have too much of an incumbent infrastructure to be able to replace so easily. The canonical example, the standard example right now is the proliferation of mobile phones in India and throughout Africa, because there wasn't, and there still isn't, a widespread landline network. There's, why install a widespread landline network now? It's ridiculous. And yet, in Europe, in the US, in Japan, there was enough of an established infrastructure, an incumbent infrastructure, that the adoption of mobile telephony did not happen at that same pace. It may have happened first, but it didn't happen nearly as quickly, and arguably in some ways still isn't as deeply embedded into social behavior as it is in parts of the developing world. You may already know about the use of mobile phone minutes as an alternative currency in parts of Africa, because the banking systems don't really want to talk to the poor. So instead, the poor have come up with their own alternative method of lending money and paying for things, and it's through the exchange of minutes. So let's think through for a minute what happens when we take these different core drivers and sort of play them out, let them go to an extreme for a bit. So the participatory future. It's the future of bottom-up drivers, enabling collaboration, participation, but also greater instability. This is the global guerrillas, the open source warfare world, as well as open source design. This notion of true participation means true agency, a role in shaping outcomes for better and for worse. This is a world where power, the ability to achieve outcomes, comes from the commons, comes from bottom-up sources. The interconnected future. A more technology-driven scenario. It's one that really focuses more on sharing of information and ideas, but it forces us to abandon a lot of things that we've held dear, notions of privacy and intellectual property. We are repeatedly running up against this, this wall of do we allow the real proliferation, the flowering of technologies of interconnection, or do we defend traditional notions of intellectual property, traditional notions of privacy? And unfortunately, it's looking more and more clear that you really can't have both. And if that's the case, if you can't have both, how do you choose? What's the balance that you want? This is a world of smart cities, where we're connected not just to each other, but to our physical environment. And it's a world where augmented reality has really come to become a leading technology, a leading industry. This is a world where power, the ability to achieve outcomes, which comes from relationships. Lastly, we have the leapfrog future. Catastrophe. Ooh, goodness, like that. Catastrophe and opportunity combine to drive the creation of new economic, political, and social models. This is a future of massive disruption and unanticipated consequences, and enormous beauty. This is the future, it's a world where power comes from creativity. This is the future that has the greatest potential to be transformative, to give us the kind of world not just that we might hope for, but a world that we truly want. Unfortunately, it's also the kind of future that's most likely to lead us to a world that we truly fear. So, hang on a sec. So what? This is so what? The next 20 years, now as Ellen indicated in my bio, I've done a lot of stuff around the environment, but also a lot of stuff around technological futures, biotech, nanotechnology, a lot of work around political futures and changes to global hegemonic behavior. This next 20 years is going to be hell. Now, yes, I phrase that as a prediction, but it's really hard to see a scenario which doesn't have some truly frightening and truly dangerous elements. We see these things happening all around us. And at the same time, to sort of connect back to what I was talking about at the outset, we know that we have the capacity to deal with these kinds of problems. We know we have the capacity to overcome these kinds of problems. And I say that because we've done it before, and we've done it under much, much worse conditions. 74,000 years ago, which is not a non sequitur, 74,000 years ago, there was the eruption of what's known as a supervolcano. It's like 100 times the size of Mount Pinatubo in 1991. It was at what's now Lake Toba in Indonesia. It put out amount of crap into the sky that literally shook the environment into an ice age. Worse than that, it killed the vast majority of humans on the planet. We, the human species, Homo sapiens, was 74,000 years ago, cut down to about 2,000 breeding families in the entire world. So how do we deal with it? It wasn't just sort of sitting it out and shuddering, shivering in the shade. We got smart. It turns out that there is a very clear connection between this period of severe climate instability, triggered not just by regular cycles, but by things like the supervolcano, true environmental chaos, and the emergence of what we now see as human intelligence, as demonstrated by sophisticated tools, as demonstrated by grammar. Language is really good. You can say words and that can describe things. Grammar is what lets you construct ideas. And the emergence of tools, the emergence of grammar seem to come in the millennia following this period of just enormous chaos. Basically, getting smarter, augmenting our intelligence is what let us get through a period that was far worse than we can even imagine this century will be. Augmenting our intelligence took millennia back then. We had to go through natural processes. Now we can do it with our technologies. And it's incumbent upon us because it will be the way we deal with a series of truly nasty events over the course of the next several decades. Augmenting our intelligence through mobile technology, through interconnection and participation, and a willingness to innovate is the way we win, is the way not just we survive, but we thrive in a dangerous future. And it's incumbent upon all of us, I think, to play a role in that augmentation, to play a role in the development of this technology, but more importantly, of the behaviors and the practices around the uses of these technologies. We're all actors here. We all have agency. We all have a role in shaping the future. Bruce Sterling, who spoke here a couple of momos ago, has a great line which I love to repeat, and that is, the future is not a destination, it's a process. It's not something, and my follow-on to that is, it's not something that happens to us, it's something that we create. And so I'd like to ask your help in creating the future that we want. Thank you. And on that happy note,
Did they change to Motorola? The thing that we were talking about yesterday and this morning was this idea about memes. And in many ways, this idea that actually one of the things that we're very good at as a species is that we see memes that enable us to thrive and survive even in very difficult circumstances. I find your argument very persuasive, as you know, in many ways I'm kind of running down a parallel track in a different augmented reality in some respects. My fear is that we're taking too long, perhaps, to understand, because again, this idea of participation, interconnectedness, the need to leapfrog in many ways, means there's a stick shift change in terms of how you think about the future. You know, it was Proust that said, you know, the real voyage of discovery is not to seek new landscapes, but to look upon the world with fresh eyes. What can we do to perhaps enable people to look upon the world with fresh eyes against the speed of which we're facing the current change?
Agitate, act, be aware, propagate those memes. It is something that I think you're absolutely right. Historically, we look at periods of great crisis. Not even periods of great crisis, but issues that we come to realize are problems, say smoking. And there is a period where you have the people who are true believers in the importance of these problems, pulling their hair out, screaming at the top of their lungs, trying to get people to pay attention, and the problem persists. It just keeps going and going. But what we don't recognize is happening is then there is this almost a genetic level change happening. It's this people are getting convinced one by one, and using primitive social networking systems to share these ideas, share their changing beliefs, and what you end up with is almost a punctuated equilibrium type condition where it seems like everything is in the status quo, and then in a startlingly short period, there's this shift. It's usually in far less than a generation. We see it happening time and again. And so what I'm crossing my fingers and hoping for is that point of punctuation, that shift is happening sooner rather than later. Because frankly, the longer it takes, the more people are going to die.
Right.
I believe it or not, I actually consider myself an optimist, or at least hopeful, I think is Howard's preferred term. Not because I really hope that lots of people will die, but in the sense of, as bad as it can get, I truly believe that we have the capacity to get through it. And we can get through it in a far better position than we, at this point, we fear is even possible. But it takes not just, learning yourself individually, but sharing that learning. Talking to other people, being skeptical, yes, but also being willing to engage. Being willing to have your mind changed, and being willing to act when you can see a point where your actions can make a difference, can make it even a small difference. You talk about the cheeseburger footprint, and I don't want to go off on this tangent, except to say the whole point of that story was not to say, oh my God, stop eating cheeseburgers. It was to say every little thing we do makes a difference. And in aggregate, those little differences have an enormous impact. And so those little differences are truly critical. So act, learn, share.
So do you think that in a way we're already on the road of that process? And again, sort of following on from what I was talking about in terms of we as a society seem to have found our current institutions wanting. Politically, the financial crisis shows that actually, the markets has actually taken themselves out of the role of society in many ways. And so, I think I agree with you in terms of your observation of it's all of us in this room, in terms of your own human agency that's important.
As well as the 5 people who are watching on live stream.
Yeah. Do you think our current political institutions are actually capable of dealing with that acceleration, or do you think as part of the transformation of what we seem to be going through at the moment, that is going to be is that a kind of a bottleneck to kind of where we need to be getting to quicker?
Our current institutions are critically important, not because they can in and of themselves deal with these problems, but the new institutions that emerge will come from the ashes of the old. And it's in those ashes, or maybe the more positive version, to stand on the shoulder of giants. We learn from our mistakes. And you ask, are we doing this already? We've been doing this for thousands of years. It is the human condition to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes and create new mistakes. They create new processes, new behaviors, create new ideas that allow us to shape the world anew.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have some more questions from Twitter. Some more questions from Twitter. One from M. De Lange. Where are you? Over there. Okay. Your question is, augmenting suggests intelligence gets better, but can it mean decreasing intelligence, e.g. capacity for navigation? Is that clear? Question?
Well, I'm not sure I get precisely what you mean by the capacity for navigation, but there's certainly an element where we are changing our intelligence. When we talk about augmentation, it is something of a shorthand. I mean, there are certainly ways in which it improves, these technologies improve our capacities, but as has been discussed time and again over the past year or two, in particular, the increasing reliance on real-time internet technology, information technologies has tended to reduce our capacity to focus for long-term or for longer periods on, the printed word. There are studies back and forth about how real that phenomena is, but even accepting it as true, that's something that if you look back at the origins of the printed word, look back at Gutenberg, there was a similar kind of panic about how printing, how writing, the printed word, would eliminate our capacity to remember things. And in fact, it did make it less, make it less commonplace to remember long and extended documents. So there is a transformation, there is a change that happened that will not be completely an unalloyed victory. There will be things that we will feel that we'll miss. But at the same time, again, I guess keep coming back to the notion that these are things that we learn from. And if it's something that we miss too terribly, if it's something that we realize we've lost something of real value, then it becomes incumbent upon us to see how can we integrate that back without losing the things that we've gained from the augmentation.
Thank you. Another question by NPH. Where are you? Over there in the back. I think you rephrased your first question to the second one. Why only react or adapt to the hell, and why not also be proactive?
Yes. When I talk about coevolution, I think reaction and proaction are, I think, somewhat simplistic, and I don't mean that as to push back on what you're asking about, but to recognize that these processes have been happening for a very long time. And what we see, even what we would see as being immediately proactive, getting in and changing our energy systems away from anything that uses fossil fuels before the climate crisis really gets bad, is still something that we're reacting to information. We're reacting to new awareness. Think about the different ways I listed, talk about augmentation. We're reacting, even in proaction, we're reacting to an expanded view, the results of an expanded view of the world. So I don't think there's as much of a distinction between the two as you suggest. Okay.
We have one more question from Yuri and then one final question on Twitter.
Yes, you showed us the metaverse roadmap for categories, mirror worlds, virtual worlds, live logging, augmented reality. I was wondering which one of those four are the most critical one for survival and sustainability in your view?
Probably something that is the blend between, in that cusp between augmented reality and mirror worlds. And that's because I think, and it's actually been my experience, that awareness and knowledge changes behavior. How many people in this room have driven a Prius or a Honda hybrid? A small number of you. One thing that you'll notice if you drive one regularly is that your driving behavior changes because you have immediate, real-time feedback of what you're doing. You know, when I have a Honda Hybrid, you know, big surprise, and a Prius. And when I got the first one in 2003, I was averaging, when I first got it, about 38, 40 miles per gallon. Within about 90 days, I was up to about 45. And it's not because the car got better. It's not because, you know, the car got broken in. It's because I got broken in. I learned how to change my behavior. And I think that's what, when we develop these technologies, the mirror worlds technologies, which are really about, you know, Google Earth on steroids, you know, getting a far more transformative understanding in models of how the world works. The augmented reality where you have this kind of layering of information, you get that data, you get that information shadow, you have that new layer of, you know, awareness of the invisible, I guarantee you that it will change behavior. And then the last one from Twitter?
No, sorry.
For one final from my
No,
side.
Yuri, sorry.
It's about mobile authenticity. You wrote about it in your blog.
Sorry,
this was an important question.
What that I wrote
It's about authenticity and about facial coding. Could you elaborate on your vision on how mobile internet might transform how people interact with each other based on authenticity? You wrote about it, how people can use facial coding using their mobile phone to scan authentic answers and.
Well, I think what you're talking about here is the piece that I wrote a few months ago. Yeah. Actually, I have to admit, kind of related to the question I asked Alan about the use of filtering technologies, ostensibly around spam and advertising. What are the implications of that? Well, one of the implications, if you have an augmented reality system that can recognize people, recognize things in the world, you have the technology to block out things that you don't want to see. I don't want to see that billboard. I don't want to see that advertisement. There's nothing about that that prevents you from blocking out other things. And if it includes facial recognition, which everyone's working on, then you can start to block out people. You can block out people that you just don't want to see. A bozo filter, to use an archaic pre-web term. This notion, you know, the notion here is that if I can identify you, if my system can identify you at a distance, you know, think about the image I showed, little yahoos on with the little arrows on people's heads. If I can identify you and I know that you are a Republican, if you are an advertising executive, if you are a major cell phone network company executive, not Vodafone, of course, then, you know, and I don't want to interact with you at all. I can just stick something up over your face where I know this is, you know, I don't want to see you. It may be, you know, maybe variations on that, but really what it comes down to is we talked today already about this notion of the daily me, this idea that we, you know, in the blogs that we read, the news sites that we read online, we're really only confirming our pre-existing biases. Well, imagine applying that model to our interactions in the real world. Applying that model to this very audience of looking around, and because your system can identify who everyone else is, and can apply the same kinds of filters that you would apply to advertising, you can start to block out people that you just simply don't want to interact with. Think about how that changes how we interact with each other. How does that change society? How does it change, you know, things like voting patterns and marketing, but also simply, how does it change what it means to be a person in a world like that? It's not an easy question. I don't think there are many good answers, and yet it's almost, I don't want to say inevitable, but it's a highly likely, unanticipated consequence of technological pathways we're already pursuing.
One question from Twitter, and then I'll get to your question. We have 4 minutes left, so
okay.
Not too long answers. A question by Wendy HK. Where are you? Over there in the corner. Douglas Engelbert talked about augmented intellect already in his 60s. Mm-hmm. Are we living his future?
I certainly hope so. And in many ways we are. And I mean that, you know, fairly broadly. I mean, think about the kinds of ideas that Doug Engelbart came up with in the 60s that have now become manifest. I mean, everyone in this audience has used, and probably uses at some point in their day-to-day lives, a computer mouse. That's a Doug Engelbart invention. we are, the kinds of things that, that I threw up on the screen are a little bit ahead, but we can think about things that are happening right now that are clear manifestations of a capacity to augment intelligence. We don't think of it in that way necessarily. We are still at the clumsy early stages of how we want to integrate intelligence augmentation. Are we going to think of it as something that we want to give to everybody? Is it something that we want to forbid, the way we would forbid doping in athletics? How do we want to integrate that into a competitive society where, as is already happening with Provigil, and as well as a couple of other attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder drugs, Ritalin and Adderall, I don't know if those are familiar, have become drugs of choice in some scientific industries because it makes you a better scientist, apparently, to take these kinds of drugs. And moreover, it means that the people who are taking the drugs have a competitive advantage over the people who, for a variety of very good reasons, choose not to. And yet, essentially, you come to a point where you start being forced to do something to yourself that you have all along said you don't want to do. Either you do it, or you get out of your line of work. And so there's this dilemma around augmentation that is, we still haven't answered. And I'm not sure we're going to answer it in a way that satisfies everyone. In fact, I'm positive we're not going to answer it in a way that satisfies everyone. More importantly, we're probably not going to answer it in the same way around the world, which then raises the question yet again, if China is augmenting and the EU lays out an edict that this is not to be pursued, how does that change the economic competition? If the UK augments and France doesn't, how does that change the economic competition? These become really difficult political questions. And it's something that Alan said that technology is social. Even more than that, technology is political. And I don't mean party politics, I mean in terms of technology is a manifestation. Whatever we call technology, it's a manifestation of our desire to affect change in the world. That is, to enact power relationships. And sometimes that has much stickier and much less pleasant implications than at other times. So one last question?
Yes.
Thank you. Of course, for the sake of conferences, we have to generalize. And
Yes.
I appreciate you could probably pick apart a number of your key comments today into entire whole weekend seminars. But there's one I think that we all try to draw a bit of confidence under, which is this: we're going to make it. Somehow we are going to make it. And yet I'm sure if pressed deeper, everyone in this group could start to break that down into what a painful journey that's going to be, separating developed world from undeveloped world, and who are the we of us who are not going to make it, in fact, along that journey.
Well, I have a list.
I'm sure you do. And my question, I mean, there's some we'd prefer, but but this is, so then let me give away the bias of the question. So the concern here is, and I'm sure we all feel it as well-informed people, that the developing world, the third world, we ask ourselves also, not just how is our startup going to get to, Series B and, we're not talking IPOs anymore, so. But more than that, I know that this group cares about to what degree are these technologies that we're working with and that we're co-inventing, to what degree do they bear the capacity for us as a subculture to transform this period of history, to say, wow, it looked really bad, there at the start of the 21st century, but the lens we were looking through was technologies from the 20th, and then we got together and said, wait a second, here's how Twitter can change it, here's how. So my question to you is essentially this: from your overview of what's really going on, how optimistic are you that we can make a real difference in changing how we made it?
Mention a short question.
More optimistic than I suspect most people would be, less optimistic than I'd like. But there's one data point which I think illustrates that what you were talking about just a moment ago in terms of looking through the 20th century lens. Energy efficiency. It turns out that over the past 110 years or so, there's been a measurable increase in energy usage efficiency globally of about 1% per year. And this is something that's been fairly well documented, that essentially the amount of work you can get out of a given amount of energy has improved by about 1% per year for the last 110 years. And that's on average, however, because there are certain places where, when pressed because of prices, because of resource shortages, there's been a need to increase efficiency much more quickly. You've seen in California in the 1980s and 1990s, in Mexico, in a variety of different places around the world where suddenly efficiency has bumped up to 3, 4, 5% improvement over the course of a year. Okay, lots of numbers, that's great. What does this mean? What it means is, remember, little changes make a difference over time in aggregate. If we could bump up the average global energy efficiency improvement from 1% to 3% over the course of the 21st century. And I know this is a really big question. It's not something that's going to be easily done, but if we could do that, what we would end up with by 2100 is a world able to support 10 billion people, which is actually greater than the current UN projections, 10 billion people with a European quality standard of living using less energy than we use today. That's 10 billion people living the way people in this audience live for less energy than we use today because of the power of slow improvements in efficiency. And that's just one data point of how the kinds of changes that just aren't in our worldview, aren't part of our lens right now, can actually be truly, globally, universally transformative for the better. And that is why I remain optimistic.
And let's conclude the talk. Thank you.